Good afternoon, everybody. You're participating in the Inaugural Policy Commission event launched by the European University for Wellbeing, EUniWell. Wherever you are, wherever you are listening to us, wherever you're watching this Inaugural Policy Commission event, a warm welcome to you. A warm welcome also, of course, to Stefano Manservisi chairing this event, my colleagues from the EUniWell consortium, and of course to Robin Mason, who will be following me with a few words about this event, and also a warm welcome to the panelists, Judith Barth, Christiane Wope, and Arnold Tucker, and Matthew Broom, whom you will see in a minute. And many thanks in advance to the women behind the scenes taking care of this webinar, Erika Arthur, Ruth Mürlich-Falke, Hannah Stratton in the technical headquarters there. I'm Professor of English Linguistics and Vice Rector for Teaching and Learning at the University of Cologne, who is the lead of this new consortium. Now, of course, before we start with this event, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what EUniWell does and what our main aims are. EUniWell, so the European University for Wellbeing, unites 255 students and 44,000 members of staff from the University of Birmingham, Cologne, Florence, Leiden, Linnaeus, Nantes, and Semmelweis, with 102 associate partners drawn from 7 regions of Europe from the fields of politics, business, research, and culture. We are a new European University Alliance with a core mission to deliver a meaningful and sustainable step change to the well-being of our institutions, to the well-being of staff, students, and also societies at large. So as such, we try to echo also the etymology of well-being, bene essere, good to be. In October 2019, the Council of Europe outlined a series of recommendations for the European Commission and the member states. These acknowledged, and now I quote, that well-being is the principal aim of the European Union, and they underline that well-being includes people, societies, and the planet, and promote a horizontal approach based on cross-sectoral collaboration. They built on a growing number of policy papers by the UN, by the OECD, the EU, and individual countries. And these recommendations stress the crucial importance of well-being and underlie our decision to create EUniWell, the European University for Wellbeing. For us, well-being is multidimensional. It ranges from the individual quality of life to social cohesion and environmental balance at a planetary level. It implies an understanding of the relations between these dimensions and the capacity to boost their synergies. Given what we have experienced and what we are currently experiencing with the pandemic, this is a very timely issue. We aim for a holistic approach in which institutions like us of higher education, research, and innovation have a leading role to play. And we take on the responsibility to take account of the crucial social challenges, societal challenges that affect this world in the fields from health, education, citizenship, rights and responsibilities, moving on to economics, culture, environment, and language as well. So with this new consortium, with this new alliance, and working in a partnership with societal stakeholders and across the research, innovation, education axis, we aim to generate new knowledge and play a critical intermediary role in delivering research-based policy to inform also decision-making, underpin education, training, and skills of the next generation, our students. Well, also to have a measurable impact on European and global citizens' well-being and quality of life. So a huge mission, but also one that is highly necessary. Now, before I hand over to my colleague Robin Mason from the University of Birmingham, I'd like to invite you to use the Q&A section at the chat here to ask questions, to make comments, so that which we also will be later using for the panel discussion. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Robin Mason, who will tell you a little bit more about what we have in mind for today. Robin.
Beatrix, thanks very much. As Beatrix said, my name is Robin Mason. I'm Vice President International at the University of Birmingham. I'm a professor of economics as well, and it's my pleasure to add my welcome to Beatrix's. Thank you very much for attending today's event. I just wanted to give you a little bit more context and also to introduce the chair of today's event. A major initiative that we will be undertaking to advance EUniWell's mission is to hold a series of international policy commissions. These policy commissions will bring leading figures from the public, private, and third sectors together with EUniWell academics to consider well-being issues of global, national, local, and civic concern. Each commission will agree the key questions to be explored, invite and consider evidence from a range of organizations, experts, and interests, as well as drawing on the relevant research within the universities in the EUniWell Alliance. The Commission will identify implications for society at large and for specific sectors and groups, and at the end make innovative and challenging policy recommendations. And this, our inaugural policy commission, will focus on the timely topic, well-being in a COVID world. And we're absolutely delighted that Stefano Manservisi has agreed to chair this inaugural commission, as well as today's event. Stefano is Distinguished Fellow of the Centre for Global Development and the Overseas Development Institute. He has over 30 years of experience in the European Commission, including working as the Director General for International Cooperation and Development. And prior to that, he held a number of senior positions, including heading the private offices of the Commission's President Romano Prodi and Commissioner Mario Monti. So again, welcome. I hope you enjoy today's event. And with that, I hand over to our chair, Stefano Manservisi.
Thank you. I don't see myself now. Okay. Hello. Okay, so as usually, there is always a bit moment of uncertainty at the beginning, but thank you very much, Robin, and thank you to all the consortium for this opportunity. Actually, I'm very excited to be with you today and honored to help. In fact, sharing is just helping. I don't want to take a lot of your time. I would like to be useful to facilitate the debate. Beatrix has already said what is the core activity of this consortium of EUniWell. Obviously, COVID-19 has given even more urgency to this mission, also underlining a certain number of challenges which are quite unprecedented because it never happened in modern economic post-World War, but even before history, that the whole economy has been kept on hold in order to protect individual health. You know, this is extremely important and extremely challenging because it is opening new avenue. So therefore, this is the first conversation of a series, and this series will, over the next 6 months, try and taking evidences from leading thinkers across academia, policy, practice, and the Commission will investigate the most appropriate means for adapting European policy approach to well-being to produce positive, resilient, and sustainable outcome in order to respond to the COVID-19 impact today, but even more for the what we usually call building back possibly better. Now, at the end, there will be a report that the EUniWell consortium will produce in order to give suggestion, give evidences, and contribute to setting the scene and for policymakers, but also for practitioners. Now, today is the opening of the discussion, and it will help in framing the terms of the debate. Basically, starting from one point that the dimension of the well-being, in particular in the light of the impact of the COVID-19, is multidimensional, meaning therefore that the analysis should look at the individual's quality of life, the social cohesion which has been created or fragmented, and the environmental balance, plus the economic impact for people and for society. So that's the reason why today the panel is composed by different experts which have a different range of background and experiences. And the panel will be able to speak about the implications of the COVID-19 on mental health, ethics, environment, and student well-being. Now, without taking too much time, I would like to introduce the panelists and then to start with the first round of questions in order to set the scene. Among the panelists, we have first and foremost a student, a representative of a student, Judith Barth, EUniWell Chief Student Officer. Judith is a present student at the University of Cologne, Bachelor's of International Relations. Then we have Professor Christiane Hopen, she is Professor of Ethics and Theory of Medicine at the University of Cologne. She is Executive Director of Cologne's Center for Ethics, Rights, Economics, and Social Sciences of Health, but very important, she also co-speaker of the German Data Ethics Commission. Then we have Professor Arnold Tucker, who is Professor of Industrial Ecology and Director of the Institute of the Environmental Science at Leiden University. And at present, he coordinates and co-coordinates major resource efficiency programs, in particular, a very, very important program, which is constructing the world's most ambitious and detailed global energy, resource, economic input, output database and models, the so-called ExioBase. Then we have Professor Matthew Broome. He's an academic psychiatrist and director of the Institute for Mental Health at the University of Birmingham, leading in the field of early psychosis and philosophy and ethics of mental health, and working actively with the UK National Health Service. Now, these are the panelists. I would like again to recall that the audience can raise questions and to use for that the function question and answer, because in this way all the group can collect and try and to pick up what are the maybe the most relevant. Now, after this introduction, I will start asking Judith first, and everybody with the most obvious in order to frame is what has been the lessons that you have learned during this COVID-19 pandemic, which is not finished yet actually, but which has told us a lot of new things in terms of individuals, in terms of relations between individual and society, and from a student point of view also is particularly important. So Judith, what are the lessons that you have learned out of it?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for letting me be here. I'd like to separate your question into two different parts. The first part is what I personally learned, and the second part is about what I think the society with a special focus on students learned during this pandemic and will definitely be continue learning. So on a personal level, I for myself learned about the importance of health, family, and a solid social system that can support each other. Also, I learned about the importance of free movement to my own mental health, and I learned about my own privilege. I have a living, I can still take my classes in university, I didn't lose a job. So that really made a big impact on my own well-being. On the level of the society, especially with regard to the situation of students, we learned that all of a sudden people's jobs are being classified into, well, system relevant workers. And then we had a discussion about who is system relevant and who is not. We learned that in these times, especially women do a lot of unpaid care work. And we learned that without this care work, well, the society would collapse. And we learned that during these times, we tend to fall back to traditional roles that are prescribed to men and women. In university, we learned the importance, well, of having classes, having face-to-face interactions regarding, well, academic exchange. We learned how important it is that we have an ongoing exchange, how much that really contributes not only to, well, the way we learn, but also to the way we create output. And we learned how much we can just appreciate, or we could appreciate, our everyday life before, and that we took a lot for granted that actually isn't. And so we definitely had a lot to learn, and I'm sure that we are still learning a lot to it every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Now, Christian, you are an expert in ethics. I think that this word and this approach has been taken up very often in all the discussions, you know, rightly, wrongly. In any case, is a dimension which has become every day more prominent, and even more for the follow-up, if I may say. We'll come back later on this. Now, what has been your taking out from this period, and the first lessons that you can summarize out of this experience?
Yes, yeah, thank you very much for having me with you for this exciting panel and this important question. And I think from an ethical perspective, well-being means that you can lead a fulfilling life according to your own values and aspirations of living. And we learned that we have, let's say, at least 3 groups of people who have an impact on the possibility, the opportunity to lead a fulfilling life. First, there are those who had and have to experience a major or an even existential threat to their possibility to lead a fulfilling life, either in health terms, so suffering under COVID-19 or under other health threats, because they are afraid to go to hospitals, they are afraid to get infected, or their surgery or therapy for cancer was postponed. So there are kinds of threats of this kind. There are economic threats. Those who who are self-employed, who are not able really to live up to their possibilities, to their economic possibilities. And there are those who have social threats, who you experience domestical violence, child abuse, or something like that. So there are really a lot of people experience very hard burdens, but there are also those who experience just a busy life. They have to combine home office and homeschooling, and they don't know how to manage their days. But those are not existential threats, of course, but we see that external and internal resources depend on each other. And there are those, and that are not so few, who are quite happy with this crisis. Life slowed down. They can think about what is important, what is not so important. They don't experience any threats. They are not so eager to open up the public space again, but because they feel quite cozy at home. And I think those differences have a danger coming with them, because there is the potential that social injustice and social inequality gets worse and not better. And I think we have really to be aware of the threat that comes from social inequality and from a gap in the society, which we already experience in some demonstrations, but what we have to take care of.
Thank you, Christian. Now, Arnold, people feeling good, staying at home, cleaner skies, but also high level of unemployment, therefore industrial ecology, let's say that in this way. What has been at the first, let's say, glance, the lessons that we have taken out of this first phase, and then we can go a bit more into the details later on. Arnold, please.
Yeah, thanks, Stefano, and also thanks for having me here. Actually, what we do with this big database that you mentioned, that is a very good way of doing environmental footprinting. So at country level, we can see how much environmental use basically a citizen in a certain country makes. What carbon, what land use, what water use, and so on. And of course, it's very interesting then to see all the time, like, are these countries efficient? Do you have a high quality of life with the lowest footprint? So we have done these kind of analysis as well. And then you see a kind of interesting pattern. You see countries that are organized very individualistically, that allow for large income differences. Actually, you see that there is a relatively low quality of life for the amount of environmental resources that they use. We in Europe, we have, I would say, a kind of guided market economy. We have social security systems. Actually, you see that we can actually have a good quality of life with a relatively low level of resources. What I find very interesting is that you see that exactly back in this whole crisis at the moment. You see the characteristics of, let's say, East Asia back in how they manage the whole COVID crisis. They usually have low amount of cases, they have top-down management, and they take care of the people. What you then see in Europe is that, yeah, we take care of our people. At the same time, we were not so well organized in all the responses in a number of countries, including my own country. But what you also see is that in my country, and I think it's the same in Germany, that, yeah, if a company sees, well, we cannot produce anymore, the government gives actually aid to the company. You can reduce the working hours, you lose a little bit of your income, but you still get paid. So people don't lose their jobs directly. If you then go to the US, that is a totally different system. You start with a country where 10% of the people has actually no health insurance. That is to start with. Then you see that their companies solve the issues they have with not being able to produce by laying off people. These people are very uncertain, have no future, and they can apply for unemployment benefits, but yeah, okay, they need these benefits. So what it teaches me is that I basically see the same kind of patterns that I see in the environmental footprint analysis. I see that now back in the whole COVID crisis. For well-being of citizens, you need actually state intervention, guidance of markets, and limiting income inequalities. And you see that countries that have that, New Zealand as the prime example, would say well-being is actually the goal, not economic growth or whatever. They do actually best in these kind of crises.
Thank you, Adel. Now, Matthew, from your point of view, which is closer to the medical dimension, the psychiatric dimension, what is the main lessons that you are taking, because it's still in the making actually, but what you are taking out of this phases of the COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you, Stefano, and thank you, Robin and Beatrix, for organising this event. I suppose the first thing perhaps is to echo the comment that other panelists have just made really about the exacerbation of pre-existing inequalities and adversity. I guess that's the most striking thing from the UK picture, that those who are most vulnerable will have had a differentially large impact of the virus, both directly perhaps through rates of risk of infection, but also indirectly through the economic subsequent consequences. In terms of sort of some data we have, so the UK's Office for National Statistics published some data on our mental health and well-being across the population. And the data there suggests that anxiety in the population peaked shortly after our lockdown in the 20-something of March, and then dropped a little bit, but still remains high. And there are several predictors of that, some of which are a little bit counterintuitive on first reading. So, for example, loneliness is a predictor of high rates of anxiety, but also relationship status. So being married or in a partnership is linked with higher rates of anxiety. And the thought is, perhaps, as Christiana mentioned, is the fact that those relationships tend to also be accompanied by having to look after young children, homeschooling, the demands of work, and bringing up children are combined. And other things, I guess, that came up of that data was the influence of disability, and importantly, whether you feel safe at home or safe at work. And again, through our work with colleagues in the NHS, feeling safe in your place of clinical practice has a big impact on mental health and well-being. And some of the initiatives we've been doing in Birmingham, as well as internationally, is how we can try and ensure these kind of basic levels of safety for colleagues in terms of personal protective equipment, but also importantly, time to rest, eat, replenish, be with friends. These kind of important things that when you're at a sort of front line of an acute emergency are very important. in terms of, I guess, the other surprise for me is how quickly we've adapted as a society. So things that seemed, a few months ago challenging. So for me to do video conferences as a clinician seems to have been made easy in terms of the governance and ethics of the way the clinical services worked. Similarly, how we've adapted as university academics to home working and remote working again seems to be impressive. In fact, how agile society has been to do that. And again, in my experience with my children in terms of their homeschooling. Clinically, I work in a deprived area of Birmingham with a population who are predominantly of Pakistani or Bangladeshi origin. And I was quite worried about how they'd manage with a bit less clinical contact, more remote clinical meetings, so using technology like this to interview patients. And I guess what struck me there is the importance of families and extended families in that group, how they've managed to sort out loss of income, difficulties in getting food, supporting the ill relative. And that's been kind of quite heartening to see how we've not had, in that context, more relapses of severe mental illness as we'd feared. And I guess also some of the things we have seen is that some of the young people themselves have found that break from societal demands somewhat helpful. So I guess some certain subgroups have reported a slight benefit in terms of the mental health, but as I say, the overall national picture is an increased rate of anxiety and depression. So I think I'll sort of pause there for my initial thoughts on that question. Thank you, Stefano.
Thank you, Matthew. I think that this first round illustrated, let's say, 4 different angles through which the ongoing experience can be assessed, putting the accent on student ethical dimension, the mental dimension, and the economic one. Now, this is showing precisely what is the big challenge in dealing with well-being in the COVID-19, meaning it's multidimensional, let's say, a characteristic. Now, let's try with the second round of discussion to see from the same angles, what this multidimensional challenge can be taken, because clearly, there are a way to ask which is the right balance between protecting people, right balance in locking the economy basically for a period, but now which has raised unemployment, which has created better and bluer skies and better even awareness about the importance of the environment and doing differently. But at the same time, and as it has been said also by Arnold, obviously that this is increasing and expanding inequalities, is creating poverty, not only among those which are the marginals of before the crisis, but also putting at risk the middle class, which was a bit more fragile in certain cases, in certain situations. So now, education, there is overexcitement about the education from remote, but this implies also challenges in terms of digital skills, in terms of infrastructures, in terms of, is that able to replace the content, and the quality of the education. So just to say multidimensional. Now, what could be, let's say, the beginning of a right balance in terms of approach between all these elements in order to achieve or going towards well-being or better being in respect to what we had before and in the light of these challenges? Judith, please.
All right. As you said, we need to find a balance between all those aspects you just mentioned. And I think one of the crucial questions at this point is how we can make sure that we can maintain a certain level of well-being, or maybe not even maintain, but get back to the level we were before. And I think what we need to keep in mind at this point is that it can't be a trade-off. We can't say, well, at this point, we need to solely focus on how we tackle the crisis and how we find a vaccine. But at the same time, we don't have time to focus on, well, how we fight the climate crisis, because we need to understand that it's all interconnected. And I believe at this point, it's really important to keep in mind what the European Union was originally built upon. So it was created as a peace project, and we need to make sure that we can still promote our values and fight for, well, what we originally created. And we need to make sure that at this point we focus on also, well, keeping up the rule of law, but also fighting the climate crisis, well, fighting or finding a solution for the pandemic or the current situation, but we also need to make sure that we have the chance to rebuild the economy, because as we said before, one of the main obstacles that we will have to overcome after all of this is over, but maybe we would have to start right now, is to find a way to fight the inequalities that have been proven maybe larger than ever before during this crisis. So as you said, this is definitely something we have to tackle in a multidimensional way, and it would be a fatal system to, well, also the national states, but also the European Union as a whole, if we started to tackle it issue by issue. We need to make sure that we connect all of this and we don't just leave anything behind, because at the moment it doesn't seem too important, because it will come back to all of us. And yeah, so I believe that, yeah, it's definitely not a trade-off, and we need to make sure that we keep all the separate issues in mind.
Thank you, Judith. Christian, now, in order to create a viable balance, let's say, which is sustainable and which is just, ethics, it's particularly important, because very often in these weeks there were discussion about trade-offs. Then, what is your thinking about this? Trade-offs, but not about ethical principle, maybe. Christian, you have to unmute. So if Christian can join later, maybe. Arnold, from your point of view there, how to build this. Okay, yeah. back.
I think it's difficult for me to follow this session because my connection is very unstable. I don't know whether you can listen to me or whether this stability is vice versa.
We listen very well.
Not very good. Yeah, okay, then I try. But I'm really sorry because I cannot listen to everyone in a very proper way. But I learned that it is about trade-offs, and I think from an ethical point of view, there are incommensurable goods. And a trade-off, of course, is very difficult. It's first a process of social debate. It's not only about a mathematically manageable task, and it is about seeing and discussing what ethical relevance those goods have. So for me, at least, freedom is the highest good. And life and health are fundamental goods. Yeah, so of course you have to live first in order to be able to be free. But on the other hand, all of us live every day in a way that is not only fostering health and that does not put health at the at the highest level of goods. We drive with our cars, we drink alcohol, we smoke, we eat in an unhealthy way. So health is not the most important good for the most of us. But when coming to economy, we have to see that economy is an instrumental good. It's not a good in itself. It's good because people can make their living, because they can work, they can contribute to society, we can foster prosperity and wealth. But economy itself is only, sorry for that, an instrumental good from the ethical point of view. And so we have to discuss how to weigh these goods. So lock down public life, economical things and so on is of course justified in an imminent disaster, but only with a sunset clause and only in a transient way. And it is only legitimate as long as it is really necessary and appropriate with regard to containment of the pandemic, not in a perfect way, but only to prevent a disaster coming up and overwhelming healthcare systems and so on. But as soon as we can allow for more freedom again, we have to do it. And so I think it is really important to convey to the public and to discuss with the public how to do that, and that there will be waves that some schools can open up and others have to close down again. Yeah, and there has to be kind of a flexibility in managing these containment measures. But I think we really have to take care of preserving our freedoms.
Thank you, Christian. Now, Arnold, in fact, this kind of, if not trade-off, but certainly better mix was already there when we were discussing about climate change, you know, and people were already keen to do things, but maybe not touching in such a dramatic way as it has been done with the COVID, people dying actually, you know, was a bit less perceived as urgent. Now, from your perspective now also the climate change agenda, the environmental agenda, and the right balance between economic interest, short-term profit, all this, and well-being is appearing even in a more strong way. You know, what's your contribution to this search for a better balance?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of interesting. I also did work on when actually societies are going into action to prevent certain things. And of course, I do it from an environmental perspective. And I think, of course, the very big difference between COVID-19 and things like climate change, it is imminent. It is your parents that are at risk. It is obvious what happened in Italy. We had the pictures in the Netherlands about what happened in northern Italy. And everybody said we cannot have that. So then all of a sudden, and even my government was wavering for a week or two before they really actually said we're going for an intelligent lockdown. But it's obvious there is an immediate crisis, and then you have the willingness to act very drastically. And we see now all the benefits. We don't fly. We have CO2 coming down for 6 or 10%. Actually, the cost that we now incur in fighting this disease, I think my country can actually deal with the climate problems for $1 billion or $2 billion a year. Well, that is peanuts compared to what we pay now, yeah? But I'm pretty sure if you go back, things go back to normal, you will see that the climate deniers, the people with interest in climate producing activities, they will fight back and they will stop the whole thing again and so on. So what I often see is that if there is a crisis, people are reacting. But when we have to act on something that only is going to happen in 20 or 30 years, you get all these other interests and whatever are going to mingle and stop things. That is, I'm afraid, what is really a big difference. And the sad thing is, in a way, that indeed, I think it was Matthew who said, how agile society at this moment has been proven to be. That's incredible. So in a way, I think, it shows actually that you can do a lot of interventions in the economy that in the end are manageable. I mean, this is the most drastic intervention we've ever done in the last 70 years since the Second World War. And then it doesn't matter if you need a Stern report or something else. A few billion investment as a safeguard against climate change. For many people, that's too much, and it becomes very politically very big. And compared to what you're doing now, it's peanuts.
Thank you, Arnold. Now, I mean, Matthew, not only through your research at academic level, but also through your concrete work now with the NHS, and talking and being with people which were on the ground also. Your let's say, input to this search of a new and better balance. I don't like trade-off. Unfortunately, there are also trade-off, let's say. But, in the search of this new balance, your experience and your research, what are suggested?
Yeah, I think that, there are, I guess, two things that we worth addressing is one, what we knew before COVID. So I think we are fortunate that the University of Birmingham published a mental health policy commission, which we entitled Investing in a Resilient Generation. So we do know some things that on a population level will promote mental well-being, prevent mental ill health. And I think the point Arnold made is a good one, is how we can think about getting politicians to act on something which has a longer temporal horizon or further into the future, where the gains may not be seen within the next electoral cycles. That's something that maybe we'll talk about later. So I think we know that certain things are very important for our population, and going to be even more so given what we've talked about, inequality and the impact of COVID. So things like improving the quality of birth for young people, parenting interventions, minimizing bullying in schools, getting mental health interventions in schooling and in the workplace, and promoting some of the things that people perhaps are doing a bit more now during this period, such as allowing people to have time for physical activity, access to green space, and enjoying creative activity. So I think there's quite a large part of data that I think could still inform our decisions post-COVID, as it were, or as we begin to go into this next phase, and we can draw on that throughout Europe. And I think, again, we should also perhaps, maybe it's me being optimistic, but there is, you do hear there's this hope of a kind of chance to reset, a kind of a hint of a utopian future that we should maybe see a glimmer of in what we've experienced. So the fact that we've all experienced perhaps a little bit more time with our family, the pleasure of not having to commute every day, the fact we've developed new ways of working, interacting, and perhaps, as colleagues have said, the decrease in air pollution and experience of difference in our environment. And it'd be nice if we can think of a way to try and capture those benefits and entrench them into the future. I think a lot of things we talked about, clinical video conferencing or home working, things that seem very impossible or difficult have proven to be more possible than we'd thought. So I think we're in a different place. Is the fact it's not possible or a straight no is no longer an option, because although it's been crisis driven, as Arnold said, we have achieved certain changes that will have had, I think, some benefits to us in terms of our mental health and well-being. It's how we can capture and crystallize those and take those forward and not go for a complete reset to prior conditions. Although being, as I say, that the caveat is that on general, a lot of people have had an increased in anxiety and depression, but it's certain features we know are likely to be helpful. I think, again, you may be aware of the UK news has been a lot about schooling and food provision. So I think there's some very simple things, again, the society can do, very sort of important public health interventions to make sure that young people, particularly school children, have the basic essentials of a safe life. So in terms of food, good schooling, feeling safe at home. And one of the worries, we have thinking forward is how to support, for example, teachers who have children now rejoining schools. And these children may have experienced quite difficult times at home through bereavement, ill relatives, experience of trauma or violence at home. So we also have a role to play in helping our fellow professionals put these structures in place, support young people's well-being as they go back into education and back into the workplace.
Thank you, Matthew. Now, trying to go a bit further after the individual, let's say, lessons taken, now the starting in defining a better balance, having in mind now what's happening what happened actually at European level, because Christian made reference to the values, to our, let's say, staying together since many decades, and on the other side, the fact that everybody was clear in perceiving immediately, in saying that a pandemic cannot be dealt with just within borders. So all this were a common language, but it remains that at the beginning, in Europe, in reality, individual reaction from states was the instinct and was the reality. And there was also the way to intervene maybe as fast as possible and as differentiated also as possible. Now, this is something to be taken into consideration because it's matching also political decision and common values in the moment of urgency. But then now Europe at large is also has reopened, let's say, in any case, has decided to pass to a second phase. Now, what could be, let's say, from the point of view of building a well-being, so the best solution for people at the end, individual people, the policy that the Union, the European Union, but also, let's say, Europe at large can take into consideration that there are specificities. There are, let's say, institutional specificity, which are not just about law, it's about culture, it's about perception, is what is contributing in making the fabric of a society, which is represented in institution, a federal state, a regional state, or a centralized state. What could be the way to take into consideration these differences, which are cultural differences too, in order to contribute in forging a European policy response, and within each let's say, specificity, they are the specificity of the constituencies, of doctors, of teachers and students. They are the different realities which are also asking for something in common, but something also quite differentiated. And actually this for Europe is not an easy field, because so far every time we spoke about economic response. Now Europe at large is confronted with a well-being challenge. Now what Europe can do, you know, being confronted with all this, take into consideration what happened in the last weeks and what are the characteristics which are creating the diversity existing in Europe. Judith.
Yes, thank you. I believe that's a very diverse question, and there are a lot of things that can be done. However, as you said, we have many different countries with many different cultures. So there's the need to find an approach that works for every culture and for every country. We as students from the consortium, we are from 7 different universities, and it's been a very enriching experience to share our backgrounds, but also to share the different systems in our 7 universities from 7 different countries. And especially, well, what has been very obvious to us is that in 7 different countries, there are very different ways of student participation. So even for us on a very small level, that has been very complicated to get it all together and find some common ground we could all work with together, and that would all work in our universities. So I can only imagine how complicated that must be on a national level, and to bring back even more, or bring together even more countries. But I think one of the main outputs from this crisis we all need to learn and we all need to understand is that it is crucial for us to have a common European identity. And this common European identity can't just be decided upon by some politicians, and it can't just be written down, and well, that it doesn't work that way. So people need to, or not only politicians, but the society as a whole and the unionists as a whole need to understand that for us, in order to go forward and be successful, we need to rebuild confidence in the European Union, and we need to shape trust that the issues, like once it comes to a global pandemic, problems can be solved easier if we act as well, the European Union as a whole, and not as sovereign national states, because we all realized that, well, a virus doesn't stop at borders, and maybe it seems natural to close down borders because, well, once a crisis appears, we all fall down back to our national states. But in this situation, it wouldn't help us. And I think what we need to learn from this is that we are stronger as one, and we need an approach that works for everyone. And in order to find that approach, we need to, well, go to the people and talk to the citizens, what they wish, what they aim for, but also what their doubts are. Because as we said, we need to take care, because the European Union and the citizens in the European Union drift apart. Even now, we have more inequalities than ever. And we need to make sure that our solutions address everyone, and not only a few people, and the few people that are privileged to even have the opportunity to even think about this.
Thank you, Judith. Now, Christian, in this, let's say, attempt to, let's say, identify what in policy terms the Union could do in order to be, I mean, the Union and Europe at large, because the reality is just is a continental challenge, part of a global challenge. Let's say, taking and putting together the need to be efficient, to be fast, but to remain different and diverse, because this is our realities, and also to give to be seen by people to being different but also efficient. You know, ethic, and also on this is playing a big role. For example, now talking about all the tracing and the tracking mechanisms that are under discussion precisely, and in certain cases even already implemented, like in Germany, for example, and other. So what's your let's say reflection about this?
Yes, thank you. So I hardly can follow the debate. I'm very, very sorry. I only hear every second word. I try my best now to answer the question as far as I understood it. I think for Europe, as the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, we had a statement on COVID-19 epidemic, European solidarity and the protection of fundamental rights at the beginning of April. And we stressed that European solidarity and the protection of these fundamental rights, which we have in the Charter of Fundamental Rights in the European Union, that we really have to take care that social inequality becomes not worse than it was before, and that we have a solidary action between the member states to strengthen healthcare systems, to have the borders open, to strengthen our economies, and that the strong are there to support the weak. Yeah, so this has to be a European answer and not only a national answer by member states. I think we learned that we have to have a better digital infrastructure, that we have to build up European sovereignty in healthcare system, getting drugs, getting the protection measures, getting the masks and so on. So all these things we have to protect all of us. Then it is important to have the digital infrastructure as well. We see how education is impaired with those necessities to keep distance. It is not a social distancing, it is a physical distancing actually. And we have to take care that it does not become a social distancing. All the hygiene measures and so on are so important. To strengthen the economies is important as well. And the European Group on Ethics worked together and will work together with a group of chief scientific advisors to the European Commission. We will have a statement on scientific advice soon, which will come probably at 24th of June. We will have a second statement of pandemic preparedness in October or in autumn. And we will have a statement, a joint statement on resilience, European resilience to crises in a broader understanding, not only health crises, next year. I think there will be a lot of things that have to be done to really be prepared for crisis and to avoid social hardship. As to tracing app, yes, we had our tracing app released yesterday in Germany, and as far as I learned, we have already 6 million downloads. There are very different systems, and I think it would take too long to go into detail here, but some use are tracking apps. They use location data and movement profiles, and others, like the German one, only use Bluetooth technology and don't have any data according to the location and movement and so on. I think the protection of privacy is very important here, to have it on a voluntary basis, not to use it as a means to get access to buildings or events and so on. There are a lot of ethical things that have to be taken into account with regard to these apps, but then they can be one of the building blocks to contain the pandemic. I'm convinced about that.
Thank you, Christian. Now, Arnold, from your point of view, which is, let's say, not only linked to the health, but to the link to health and, let's say, the enabling environment to do better because other factors, the economic, of ecology, the let's say, environmental dimension is crucially important. How do you see this sort of input for Europe to be inspired in order to be efficient, to coordinate, but also do it because it is not only respecting, but being inspired by diversity.
Let me first say that I think actually in situations like this, I did actually a PhD thesis which was very much about framing and working in uncertainty and all this kind of stuff. When we started with the whole crisis, very little was known. So I think it was actually a very good point for Europe that different countries had different approaches in solving the problem. And by now you can see that maybe what the Swedes have tried with herd immunity maybe was not the best idea. That some other countries like the Czech Republic directly going for mask, Greece that performed brilliantly in the whole crisis. So you can actually learn what worked and what didn't work. And if you have one unified approach, you don't have that learning experience. So maybe that is one thing that I think is an advantage of Europe and different countries trying to do different things. But then when you go to the higher level, of course, if you want to do things like, okay, we want to avoid that, I don't know, that's what happened after the financial crisis, that basically the states took the bill and the banks could continue. And in the end, you and I as citizens were paying actually off in the terms of higher taxes or lower funding for universities and budget cuts. I think working out something that works much better than that, I think for that you need the EU. You need to think, okay, how can we do this? And member states still have to do it. But at least when you have a big economic bloc that's powerful enough to do that. Your point that you heard is more about resilience. That again goes back to the kind of work that we do with all these input-output databases. We see actually the global trade flows with our database. And you see that China really has become a hub for the production of everything. So that's why all the mouth masks had to come from China. We don't make them ourselves anymore. And that becomes an interesting question because this development basically was put in motion for a reason. It was apparently economically better that we concentrate on certain activities in China on others. And you see now that a globally connected production system with production nodes of certain goods in certain areas of the world is actually quite vulnerable. I saw that earlier in the crisis around rare earths. That is a material that you need in tiny quantities to make your LED lights, to make your computers, to make powerful magnets. That all comes from China at the moment because, yeah, the Chinese are still mining and we in Europe find it too dirty. I was part of a committee of the EU, advising the EU how to deal with that. And I found something very interesting. There was a big car manufacturing on my committee. And I was basically saying, well, opening a new mine, that cost you a few billion, you need maybe a few $100 billion risk capital. That was the price of 2 airplanes. I mean, what do we talk about? Why can't the EU put in money for that, the risk capital? And then we have a second supply chain. We have built resilience. Or car manufacturing, why don't you invest in that? What actually was happening is that the car manufacturer is like, no, Arnold, don't write it down in your report. We don't want that. We don't want to have additional payments from us to build more resilience. And of course, they hope that the EU would step in here. So you actually sit in a very complicated discussion that when there are times of crisis, you see that resilience is not there. You want to invest in actually doubling up the supply chains. Then again, this urgency is there. And then the minute that the crisis is over, people forget all this and don't want to do it because it makes your car maybe 1% more expensive. And here also, I think the EU can play a role. It has to do with more or less things like, okay, yeah, what do you leave to a free market, free trade, and to what extent do you want to step in, as in this case the EU, to build resilience, and what cost is it? What is the value that it can take?
Thank you. Now, Matthew, from your point of view now, also from closer, in the sense you have seen the diversities and the impact on this on the ground too, not only in your analysis, in your research. So therefore, what could be your suggestion for an input for a better way of coordinating and formulating also policy for coordination, which are credible and effective?
Yes, I can't claim being an expert on EU policy, but I think one of the things that struck me over the last few years in working with young people in particular around their own concerns about well-being and mental health is that my initial, I guess, hypotheses didn't seem to be the case with them. So we're very lucky in Birmingham to co-produce a lot of our research with young people themselves. So when if you ask young people what kind of things they think might be impacting on their mental health and well-being, they don't often come up with trauma, social media, the kind of first things that maybe I would have thought of. And they quite often point towards these more geopolitical topics we've discussed around. So they will mention climate change, they will mention Brexit and the EU, they will talk about, in the UK at least, the impact of austerity and recession. And it's one of the things, this might be a very hard thing to make policy around, but I think one of the things they often talk about is what is their future going to be like? I think that's something that I think we could perhaps think of as part of this commission or these series of commissions, is what a future will be for a young adult or an adult in Europe going into the future. Because a lot of them do compare themselves with what their parents have experienced over the last 10, 15 years and see a world where there are precarious jobs, it's difficult to get housing, there's food poverty, there's inequalities, and a lot of them do kind of say, why, I don't want to sign up to this, what's the social contract doing for me? And there's a bit of, I think we need to be a bit of hope, a bit of optimism, and a bit of future towards that. Because I think that's the problem, I guess, like, philosophically, it's like a bit of nihilism that some of the young people do suffer. And what is the meaning? What's the purpose of this project? Where am I going towards? I think practically, I mean, we have obviously the impact that young people will be struggling to get jobs and to get employment. And again, I heard yesterday on the BBC News in the UK that they say each vacancy now has 4 to 8 times the applicants than it had pre-COVID. So I'm particularly interested, obviously, in youth mental health. So young people who may be leaving university or leaving education will be struggling to get jobs. So I think, although there'll be an element perhaps of creating jobs, I'm not going to comment on economics, not my expertise, but the kind of Keynesian, let's create jobs for people to work. We've been doing that to some extent. Whether we can indeed, as a kind of society, as policy, perhaps support activities that we know promote mental health and well-being, such as kind of more pro-social and altruistic acts. So encourage young people who maybe can't find a place in the economy to think about volunteering, developing social interests and cultural interests, and encouraging education. I think these are some of the things, again, we could begin to think about how we don't have a lost generation, but again, that slight twist towards not a purely economic means to an end account that Christiane described, it merely think about the top value being well-being of our population. And in doing so, I think we can think about different strategies to achieve that. The one bit I don't have a feel of is I guess, where I started from. What is it the young people themselves want to see in 10 years' time? What kind of society they want to be part of? What can we offer them as a draw?
Thank you much. Now, I think that if we are a bit quick, maybe using a bit less of time, we can have another round of questions before coming to the questions coming from the audience. Now, on one point which has been appearing very clearly in these weeks, the role of experts. You know, I'm talking about real experts, not just people who are improvised scientists and every day in the TV screens and, you know, and even on newspaper were telling truth for which they were not particularly expert. This is also an issue to take into consideration because, you know, in the immediateness, you know, of people listening to the one which is profiling the strongest, you know, there is also this risk. So, but let's talk about now the real expert, the real scientists, what kind of role they played, and in particular when politics, for a number of reasons, decided to deviate or not to follow, and literally, what has been the recommendation, what has been the impact out of it, and the perspective from the point of view of, you know, a well-being of people in the sense of, let's say, the trust, the confidence, the hope, which was generated or not by this dynamic between expertise, which by definition is supposed to say things which are to be done, and then the political decision, which maybe did something different for a number of reasons. So this, I think, is particularly important in order to design a bit what is contributing to people to feel better in managing a complex crisis like this one. Maybe this time I will start with Matthew. I start in a different order, in order also to take from the different angle, maybe a different point of view. Please, Matthew.
Yeah, so this is a very pertinent question, both in terms of, I guess, UK policy and I guess my own research interests. So I guess brutally, I think, yes, I think it's very clear that scientists, academics and experts have a clear role to play in the COVID-19 pandemic. I've already seen some beginnings of the fruits of that. So certainly we're seeing, you know, interesting results from trials to treat the most severe stages of the illness with the dexamethasone preliminary data being published yesterday, vaccine trials underway. So it's very clear that scientific biomedical expertise is already gaining traction. But I think one of the challenges, and I guess our discussions perhaps illustrated that, or hopefully has illustrated that, is that the whole academy and the whole range of expertise is going to be required to deal with this, whether it's economic, political, social science, philosophical, etc. So I guess that's the one point. Is not only is virology and drug development important, but the whole range of academic endeavour and the methodologies contained. So I think that's clear. I think in the UK, I'm not sure how it has panned out in other countries' media or the rhetoric of the response, but we had this we follow the science line from the UK government, which I can understand on one level, because I think if you're a government trying to mobilise a population, you want clarity, simplicity, trust, and compliance to be the kind of values you want to emphasise. But I guess the risk of that, which we're beginning to slightly feel now, is that it presents science as kind of unitary, simple phenomenon with a direct kind of fact to action step, which is not so clear in reality. And as you said, Stefano, there has to be implementation, interpretation, politics, decide what you do with this data, how you frame it, how you weigh it, how you put it into context. So I think there's a slight bit of eliding over that step by the way science was portrayed, at least in the UK policy sphere. And I guess we're at the stage now of having a bit of a cracks in that appear now, where some of the previous scientific advisors are now criticising the government, and decisions getting more complex and nuanced. So that kind of easy split between simplicity and action and complexity and uncertainty, which is maybe the home of science, which we all kind of live in but isn't very comfortable sometimes, is becoming more strained. On one level, that's kind of, you could just say that's the way it is. But I guess my worry now looking forward is if we do have a very clear scientific opinion, such as vaccination is good, we need to roll out vaccination, is how we keep that trust and renew that trust, allow people to take these very important public health messages on board and action them. So I think, science and expertise is really important. We're going to have to really draw up and recruit the whole academy to deal with these challenges and try and encourage interdisciplinary working even more than ever, I would say, and across Europe. But also perhaps as academics gain a knowledge of how government and policy works, perhaps a little bit more, and try to help navigate this tension between complexity, simplicity, clarity and uncertainty that I think is hard. As I say, the motivation being, when you have a clear message about treatment in the future, we need to make sure it's heard and acted upon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Please, Arnold. In the Netherlands also there's been something which was
particularly interesting. I really like what Matthew was saying. I mean, actually this goes back to a PhD thesis, where as a good chemist, I was chemist by training, you start with the idea that, okay, science is somewhere there, is very pure, very factual, and policy is somewhere there, and you have the adagium, science speaks to power. And science is almost the arbiter of things. Well, then of course you learn it's not true like that. Most of the problems that we face in society are highly complex. You have bits and drabs of knowledge that you know. You combine it to a kind of picture that makes sense. And COVID-19 is nothing else. I mean, we still don't know very basic facts, like how many people can they spread without symptoms. How important are they? Is there aerosol transmission or not? All these kind of things. We don't know it. The tests that we used, how many false positives do we have there? If you would do in the Netherlands what Wuhan has done, testing all the people in the province, then we would have, with a 1% positive false positive rate on the population in the Netherlands, we would probably have, if I calculate very quickly, over 70,000 positive cases that are actually not positive cases. We know that we have now 2,000 active cases, more or less. So there are huge amounts in this whole thing. And what I see happening, that also the Netherlands plays this game as we are politics. We have an institute called Institute for Public Health, and we have this great old man, fellow professor at Leiden University, that is the chief scientist. And I see, frankly, what is being done is that they are mingled. NVM is a kind of brought into policy game, and sometimes they say this, and I have the strong feeling that it's a kind of colored kind of thing, because policy needs it, and sometimes they say something else. And I think that is dangerous, because what you basically see at the moment is that people start to distrust this institute, because they see actually that they come out with statements like mouth caps, don't use them. It doesn't make sense. What was the real reason? I have seen my dean of the medical school in panic a week before we went to lock-in because he had no mouth caps. That was the real reason. Keep population quiet and all those kind of things. Tell an old story, we need the mouth caps for the medical personnel, and you come later, it makes sense. That already makes you more credible. But yeah. So that was one thing. And you see a number of other things. At this moment, of all things, they say, well, you have to keep the distance of 1.5 meter, but then there's an advice that in airplanes you don't need it. Yeah, sorry. I mean, there all of a sudden they say, well, we weigh all the risks and we think we can do it. It's clear, we have KLM, we have Airbus, there's all kind of pressures. So I think that designing the right policy interface between science and policy, that is incredibly important. And yeah, I think we are kind of in a lock-in, if you like, that things started in a certain way and that is how it's done now. And I'm not very, how do you call it, reassured that this will give the best outcome. And in a way, I'm therefore happy that we have the Netherlands do it in this way, Sweden in another way, whatever. So hopefully you can then learn from other countries. Yeah. And at least you don't have this Moloch kind of thing where one frame is becoming dominant.
Yeah. Thank you, Arnold. Now, Christiane and Judith, very quickly, unfortunately, because time is running and there are a certain number of questions also to take in order to give space for the audience. So, Christiane.
Yeah. It's fine. I want to stress that we first have to talk about what science is. Yeah, because there is the notion of science only referring to life sciences. My notion of science is broader, encompassing every kind of science. So I think in the English and Anglo-American context, we have to stress that which kind of notion of science we have. And then I want to strengthen one aspect and to put it in the foreground, and that's about multidisciplinarity. We will stress it in our statement from the European Group on Ethics and the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors as well, because this crisis is not only about virologists, not only about epidemiologists, and not only about economists. Yeah, there are so many other things touched. And if you see that the pandemic really touches everyone in his or her life, and that it touches every societal area, you immediately get aware that every single science is involved in managing this pandemic. And there was one question I saw already with regard to cooperation, and this refers to science as well, how to really be involved in multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and ideally transdisciplinary research. Yeah, and scientists have to be very transparent about what they know and what they not know. We have to have a societal debate which questions we ask. So which kind of facts do we want to get? Which kind of evidence do we have to get? We have to differentiate between epistemic confidence and moral trust. So be very careful with the word trust. And I think yeah, the public has the opportunity now to learn more about how science is working and how science is functioning and the mechanisms of science, yeah, pre-publishing, all the debate about data. And we had a lot of discussion in Germany as well about, between virologists, yeah, having the same facts, but interpreting it in a different way. So, and only one point with regard to the interrelationship between politics and science. Politicians cannot only follow scientific evidence. Yeah, they have to take other things into account as well. Our societies live a lot on the basis of what science produced, yeah, and brought forward. But living is more than following scientific facts or scientific deliberations. So politicians have to do a much broader job, but they of course have to take into account scientific evidence. And if they don't do that, that is ethically actually not a very good thing, to be very careful.
Yeah. Thank you, Christiane. I think it's particularly important to say that there is not one science. The problem in these weeks has been precisely that there have been portrayed this science about health, about the virus, and the other were challenges from the economic point of view, from the environment point of view, from you know, the societal point of view, while precisely is this complexity which should be put in front of politicians. Now, Judith, you are watching experts and scientists every day as a student. You know, what could be your recommendation from this point of view?
Yes, thank you. Just one very brief point. So from an outsider's kind of view, we realized that for now in Germany, we make jokes about how every German has their favorite virologist. And that
Yeah.
must be such a strange feeling for those people who worked in science and in academics, but they've never been popular before. So we as a society need to make sure that those people can still do their jobs, talk to politicians, but the decisions need to be made by the politicians who are elected, which is their job. But they have to make sure that they're listening to the scientists, because like Christiane said, that's the only way to come to a conclusion and to make a good conclusion. And it's really important that politicians need to listen to scientists, but at the same time, it's important that scientists are aware of the fact that they're not politicians.
Yeah, sometimes this is not so clear for some, let's say. Now we have a few minutes for question, and thank you to Beatrix and the other colleagues. They try to sum up a bit. I mean, I will take two because I think there is no time anymore. Let's say one question is, you know, it's quite easy to talk about multi-dimension, multi-facet reality of the well-being, but how concretely, in real terms, is possible to have collaboration and coordination among the different aspects in order that a more visible, let's say, well-being policy is taking shape? You know, this is a question which is complex, of course, but what would you suggest? May I ask Arnold, for example, about this?
Can you repeat very quickly, because I
No, the
missed
question
the
is that basically, you know, all the discussion has shown the multi-level and multi-dimension of well-being. But the question is how concretely cooperation can combine all this in order to suggest to policymaker to. So what mechanism of coordination and collaboration can be identified?
Do you want a research program? Because then, of course, you put everything together. It's then actually this group of 4 panelists is actually too narrow already. Frankly, I would be very interested in that. It puzzles me. I'm not a social scientist, I'm not a psychologist, but what puzzles me, if I have these simple graphs of Human Development Index, which is a kind of illustration of quality of life, versus what is it, GDP per capita or environmental use, you see actually that differently structured countries realize a lot of quality of life with actually little money or little environmental impact. And that suggests that the structure of society is very important. So what I see in Cuba, they live longer than in the US. Well, they have a healthcare system that probably is even better than the US, at least at the ground. They have more doctors in Cuba than in sub-Saharan Africa. But they make a choice of that. You know, they give everybody free education, that kind of thing. So often I say it's wrong, but I would like to see research on that. And it is very political laden research, because it tells you that certain policy paradigms actually are worse for society as others. But I think we have to do that. And then my gut feeling is that the individual Anglo-Saxon culture is not the way to go. It has to be something more common.
Well, thank you.
Would like to,
No, it is. I mean, this will take a lot of time, because basically, you know, at the bottom there is the capacity of democracies to be complex and efficient. You know, and therefore to take all this together, not to follow the last point, which is very often taken by the populists in order to challenge all the rest. So it's very complex. But now, I mean, you did ask to say a word on this.
Yes, I'd like to contribute something from the students' point of view. Well, if you ask how do we effectively collaborate, I think one of the most important issues to tackle in the beginning is that we need a working interchange, and we need just a general exchange of, well, what is happening. On the university area, we see that basically overnight we went from, well, studying and seeing each other in person to just having everything digital. That means that for us, many classes are a one-way street, which means that professors are just videotaping themselves, uploading them. That means that, well, the whole academia for us has changed overnight. But it also means for us that there's like the exchange we had beforehand, also when it comes to personal problems, is for us more important than ever. And it needs to be institutionalized that students that face very individual problems at these times, like some have to take care of their kids because they can't go to school anymore, but some students now all of a sudden fall into the role of a caretaker for a parent or a grandparent, and we need to have an exchange for that, and that's very important, and that needs to be clear. And we need, before we can collaborate on a European scale, we need to figure out what is going on in our own hometown or our university. And after we do that, we can address that maybe on a local level, and then on a national and on an international level. And that would contribute, at least at the moment, very, very much to student well-being, because for us, one of the most pressing issues is that we really have a lot of uncertainty. We don't know how exams or when exams are taking place. We don't know if we have to wear a mask in a very stressful situation for 3 hours. We don't know what to do with our kids at that time. We can't use libraries. So there is so much to do for us at the moment, and it really needs, just like Beatrix in the beginning said, it needs a holistic approach, and we really need to pull together here.
Thank you, Judith. Now, the last question, we have 3 minutes, is about digitalization and digital economy and digital skills, you know. And the question is, are we, let's say, overstating and presenting that in a too much positive way, the fact that digitalization can be a solution, both to the societal challenge and also to well-being? Maybe I will ask Matthew about this, because, you know, there are many facets. But certainly there is an element of, you know, of let's say, combination between a technology and people and the minds of people, in particular in view of the artificial intelligence, but not only. Just now, today, about digital solutions in general.
Yeah, no, thank you, Stefano. Yeah, it's a question I think I've been thinking about, I guess, with various hats on, as a parent, as a clinician, as an academic. I think I, was struck as a parent saying, last week screen time was bad, this week screen time is good. And we saw a very rapid shift in all of us. I guess in terms of thinking about the evidence, again, we know that work-life balance is very important for mental health. And I guess when I think about, I guess there's something else we're going to talk about with this consortium about staff and student well-being. We talk about how it's appropriate for academic mentors to model that to their doctoral students, their undergraduate students. But I think where the working from home has also sort of merged into the idea that home has become all work. So I think there is that kind of slight, the ubiquity of digital ways of interfacing with work has meant that we can do it all the time. So that clear divide between home and work has become less marked. And that's obviously in some ways because geographically, physically, we're at home, but also digitally, we're kind of there all the time as well, which I think, as Judith pointed out, means that our other roles can get more complex, more difficult. The kind of mental fatigue of day-to-day life has ironically got more. And again, it's this thing we don't have data on, but I guess people keep telling me this anecdotally. They feel more tired working at home despite, not having to be on trains or not having to climb stairs and this kind of thing. I think in part that's because of maybe the lack of social reward. You maybe don't get so much through remote working, but also the fact your brain is in different places at once. You're a parent, you're a teacher, you're an academic, you're doing lots of things at the same time. So I think the question is well put. I think digitization has been good. It's important. There are some gains to be made, but I think we just have to think about how to ring fence that or put certain caveats around, so we still have some capacity to be private citizens, and as Christiana said, to maintain some elements of freedom and choice in our life, private time with our families. So I think there's a bit of working out we need to do, and it's probably a kind of exaggeration of trends that are already there. I remember being told, however long, 8-10 years ago, I was given a BlackBerry when I was an NHS consultant in Oxford. I was told, we know that if we give you this, we'll get X thousand pounds of free work out of you. So I was very much aware that once managers know that these things work and allow you to labour outside of your contractual obligations. So I think we need to make sure that with this digitization, we kind of resist some of those subtle moves.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. We are precisely on time. Thank you from my side, to all the panelists and to the audience. Now it's time for the closing remarks. I pass the floor to Hester Bijl, Vice Rector Magnificus of the University of Leiden, who will deliver the closing remarks, which are closing remarks for this session. I would like to recall that there are several policy commissions which are going on. This work will take over for a certain period of time. It's very complex. Therefore, it will not be the last time that this discussion will be developed. Now, Professor Bijl, please.
Thank you very much. Well, to begin with, I would like to thank you all for being with us and thank the audience for their excellent questions. Warm thanks to Stefano Manservisi for chairing, and of course to our panelists, Judith Barth, Christiane Wolpen, Arnold Tucker and Matthew Broom for their excellent contribution to the opening panel discussion of EUniWell's Policy Commission on Wellbeing in a COVID World. I think today's debate clearly demonstrates that the coronavirus gave an additional urgency to our search for a new balance. I think it truly demands that we re-envision well-being from multiple perspectives. And that's at the core of EUniWell's ambition. The coronavirus requires policymakers, as has been said, to navigate conflicting priorities and balance competing trade-offs as they consider the future of well-being post-COVID, in order to come to a better mix, as has been said. To do this effectively, a broad expertise base is needed, and today's debate shows the important role that EUniWell's network of experts can play. Today was just the beginning, as Stefano also said. Over the next 6 months, this EUniWell's Policy Commission will further work to develop a multi-dimensional approach to well-being in a COVID world. To begin with, we will convene a series of roundtable discussions focusing in detail on the individual, societal, environmental, and health implications. Then next, we will bring together academic experts from EUniWell's 7 partner universities, cross-sectoral representatives from EUniWell's 102 associate partners, and invited experts in the fields. And then finally, through the COVID Policy Commission, EUniWell will make the case for a balanced and measured approach to well-being to be at the center of future European policy. As you heard today, a true but tremendously relevant challenge. Please note that there will be other policy commissions, as Stefano also said. There we can take into account suggestions made today on other topics. Again, many thanks for being with us today. I hope you will join us for future discussions. We'll keep you posted on the details, and have a good day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.